Hi class, this is Professor Bloom and this is our Chapter 2 lecture Part 1. So we've discussed and introduced the discipline of kinesiology, and we've talked about that kinesiology is based on 3 different ways of learning, and we talked about physical activity and defining it and explaining it, but now we're going to expand on really understanding physical activity. And for us to really understand how big and how broad physical activity is and how pervasive it is in our lives, we first need to think about how often we engage in physical activity every single day. And sometimes when we think about physical activity, our first thought jumps to exercising or sports, but it's so much bigger than that. It's so much broader than that. The amount of things that we do in our lives every day that are considered physical activity. So I want you to think more broadly. What types of physical activity have you engaged in already today? Think about from the moment that you woke up and you got out of bed and you went into the restroom and you did all your personal grooming. Maybe you walked into the kitchen and you made yourself breakfast and ate breakfast, and so on and so forth throughout the day. And when you include all of these types of physical activities, which is when we look back to Chapter 1, our definition of physical activity, we realize all of these things fall into the category of physical activity. It becomes a little more obvious that physical activity is part of almost every single thing we do. And we need to remember that there's an enormous range of movements in a wide variety of contexts that are considered physical activity. And physical activity experience is more than just how much a person moves, but it also includes the different kinds of movements that one performs. So in Chapter 2, we're going to look at the 7 spheres of physical activity experience. And remember, when we talked about understanding that kinesiology is based on 3 different ways of learning, we talked about physical activity experience as one way, and the scholarship and scholarly study of physical activity as another way, and then professional practice and experience in physical activity as another way that kinesiology, that are the 3 sources of knowledge for kinesiology. But the first one we're focusing on is physical activity experience, and that'll be the one that midterm number 1 is based on. And so again, when looking at physical activity experience, we're going to look at it through the eyes of these 7 spheres of physical activity experience. And the 7 spheres are not meant to classify the types of physical activities, but it's there to help us provide a general framework for thinking about, in the various different areas of our lives or contexts, the importance and pervasiveness of physical activity. And these are the different ways and contexts that we experience physical activity. And it helps us to highlight different aspects of our lives in which physical activity plays a really important role. And we're also going to learn, and it's going to show us when we're looking at the spheres, that some activities that we do are common to more than one sphere. So the first sphere that we're going to look at is the sphere of self-sufficiency. So to live functional and independent lives, we must be able to perform activities of daily living. And physical activity is necessary to be able to care for ourselves, and it's used to judge our level of independence. So activities of daily living are ADLs, And there are things like personal care behaviors, bathing, dressing, transferring, using the toilet, eating, walking. These types of activities are all activities of daily living. They're ADLs. And they're the physical activities that we need to be able to care for ourselves and be self-sufficient. Here's some examples of different ADLs, activities of daily living. People walking, getting up out of bed, tying our shoe, bathing. So these personal grooming and hygiene type of behaviors activities all fall under activities of daily living. IADLs are instrumental activities of daily living, and they're more strenuous than ADLs. They're a little less personal than ADLs, and they include things like being able to do light housework, preparing meals, taking medications, shopping for groceries or clothes, and using the telephone. So when we're thinking about activities of daily living, that is our most basic level of self-sufficiency, our personal behaviors, our grooming that we talked about in those previous slides. And then IADLs is a higher level of self-sufficiency. Again, they're a little more strenuous than ADLs. And here's some examples of IADLs. Somebody going grocery shopping, cooking, vacuuming the house. Those are all examples of instrumental activities of daily living, IADLs. And then continuing on in that idea of self-sufficiency, even more advanced ability to care for oneself might involve being able to perform home maintenance activities. These are more complicated and demand more energy than ADLs and IADLs. And there are things like shoveling snow, doing repair work, painting the house, fixing a car, those type of activities. So remember, to live functional, independent lives, we must be able to perform activities of daily living, ADLs, and instrumental activities of daily living, IADLs. Occupational therapists and physical therapists are professionals that work with people who, through perhaps having sustained an injury or disease, have lost their ability to perform ADLs and IADLs. So therapists can help patients to strengthen muscles, or they can master movement patterns to accomplish these tasks to be able to perform ADLs and IADLs. And ADLs and IADLs are important when we're talking about level of self-sufficiency, and they're often used by health insurance companies or disability insurance to gauge a person's ability to be self-sufficient and their qualifications to receive different support or benefits. And you can be born needing help with ADLs and IADLs, again, through disease, or you could be born, missing a limb, or having other different disabilities. And these are also things that can occur all throughout our lives, again, through injury or disease. For example, post-surgery, veterans that have lost a limb, people that have gotten hurt in a car accident, people that are diagnosed with a disease. So this can happen all throughout our lives and is very common something that occurs as we age. So as we get older, being able to do ADLs and IDLs can become harder. Certainly older people are often injured trying to do these. And as a result, their dependence on others increases and their quality of life diminishes. Limitations in performing ADLs and IDLs require many elderly people to depend on others or on institutions to perform their tasks of daily living. And this problem holds great importance in both personal and economic terms. So the challenge for kinesiologists is through research and practice to discover ways to prevent or slow the decline in function due to age, or decrease overall physical activity levels, thus improving the quality of life and self-sufficiency and lowering healthcare costs for aging adults. Increased physical activity is one of the most effective ways to reverse functional declines related to age and decreased physical activity levels and their associated negative consequences. The next sphere we're going to talk about is a sphere of self-expression. So consider how you express yourself through physical activity. Think of your last conversation. Did you move your hands while you were talking? Or did you slowly move towards the door as you were trying to end the conversation and get away? What messages through your body language and your expressive body movements are you sending to others? Are you sending messages of happiness, concern, interest? So gestures are intentional movements that communicate information to others, and they supplement or replace spoken words and oftentimes reflect cultural differences. Emblems are actions that have a direct translation, such as a referee making a hand signal to indicate a touchdown, or movements that military or police make to communicate specific messages to people, like stop or go when they're directing traffic. Illustrators are gestures that complement our words. They can also indicate emotion or a tone. So for instance, when you're telling the story of this amazing fish that you caught, you might use your hands to illustrate how big that fish really was. Regulators affect the flow of a meeting or the conversation. So, for example, waving for someone to come to you while you're talking, or moving towards the door as you're talking to indicate the end of a conversation. So we use physical activity in the form of gestures as a means of communication and a way of self-expressing. And we do it in combination with words or sometimes in place of words. Another way that we express ourselves through physical activity is dance and rituals. So dance and rituals, they convey feelings. They can convey words, symbolic meanings. And dance is an art form that uses physical activity to express attitudes and feelings that might be difficult or impossible to express through normal verbal communication. And rituals often employ physical activity to express symbolically sacred values or beliefs. So here are some examples of different types of dance or rituals, and you can see that they can express attitudes and feelings, certainly, or sacred values and beliefs. So the next sphere we're going to look at is the sphere of work.